Hi, happy Thursday, everyone. So, tonight we are going to talk about coping with grief. So, I'm sure that most of you watching have all experienced some kind of loss, whether it's loss of a loved one, family member, friend, acquaintance, a pet, right? Somebody or something that you held dear to you and lost that. It can even be a loss of a job, career, a hope, of something, maybe a dream that you had that maybe isn't going to come to be. Some kind of loss, something that causes you to feel grief, to feel sadness, to feel an emptiness, a void. Hi, Noelle, welcome. So, unfortunately, this is part of life and something that we all at some point go through. So, there's obviously a question of how do you deal? How do you handle the loss, the sadness, the heaviness, the hurt, the pain that comes along with it? And the thing I want to just say is that I don't believe that there's just one way to handle grief. I don't believe that there is a certain amount of time that should be put on it for people. I also don't think that with the stages of grief that it's to happen in a certain way and that's the only way. So for instance, many of you may be familiar with the stages of grief, but it goes denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, right? So denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Those are the stages, but it does not mean that you have to go from denial to acceptance all in that order. It does not mean that you may get to a point where you're bargaining right away, that you find out the news of something and you're on your knees begging God, pleading with God, bargaining, anything to make it change, to make it different. And then you go to anger, or then you go to denial, and then you go to acceptance, and then you go to depression. The thing is that there was a notion, years ago that there was a specific set way in which we grieved. That seemed to be the logical way in which people would process through the grief process. But we've come to realize and see that people go back and forth. They go up the scale, down the scale of the stages, and it really just depends. And there's no real right amount of time. A lot of the people that I've worked with dealing with grief, one of their biggest struggles was that people were saying, okay, it's been such and such a time. You should be over this by now, or you shouldn't be so sad anymore, or you shouldn't be so devastated anymore. It's been this long. So people tend to have this sense of there's a time limit on grief, that if it's been so many months or years, you should be over it by now. And the reality is that some things I don't think we ever get over. I think we just learn to deal and to cope and accept the reality. So talking about denial and anger and bargaining and depression and acceptance, within those stages, there's ways to cope. Right? So ultimately, coping is just choosing to do something that helps you get through the pain and the suffering and the hurt and the sadness and the anger. Hi, Elaine. Welcome. So those of you who are live and those who watch recorded, give me a thumbs up if you've ever experienced loss or have lost someone close to you and have experienced the feeling of grief and sadness. You could just hit the little thumbs right next to your name there while you're watching. I'm guessing that most of us have, right? Most of us have experienced the sense of loss. So in those different stages, there's different things that we can do to cope. So primarily there's just a few that are just main and that are tried and true. And the first one that I'd like to talk about is just finding someone you can confide in, to talk about it, to talk about the hurt, to talk about the sadness, to talk about the loss, to just cry, right? The typical just lean on me, cry on my shoulder, to have someone in your life to do that can just help you just let your emotions out. In order to cope and to handle the intense pain and the loss and the sadness, you need to let yourself process and to identify those feelings and to sit with them and to let yourself feel them. So many times, especially in denial, you try to push it away because you're trying to deny the reality that it's true, that it actually happened, that this person is gone, or your pet is gone, or the whatever you hoped for, your dream or your job or whatever it is gone. And you want to deny that that's even the reality until you push away those feelings. You know, the anger, when you feel so angry and you start asking and screaming, why is this happening? You know, it's not fair. And all of those feelings, again, recognize them, realize them, sit with them, and share them with someone. Talk with somebody, journal, write out all your feelings. Maybe listen to music. Get yourself into a point of just learning to calm yourself and to handle the feelings of it. Prayer, right? To just find that security and that hope in your faith, to pray. You know, that's where I think a lot of people, whether you have a faith or not, when you get to bargaining, all of a sudden you're bargaining with a God that maybe you don't even think that you believe in, and you're begging for it to be different. You know, some would suggest, especially in the Christian world, that to bargain with God is even just a very silly thing to do, right? To think about bargaining and saying, okay, God, if you change this, or if you make this not so, I'll do this forever, or I'll never do this again, right? And that in itself can just seem foolish, but yet that speaks to the desperate state in which we can find ourselves in when we're dealing with grief and the loss and the pain. But seeking God, to seek God in comfort, and to find that peace that you find in your faith. That is a huge coping skill. That is something that can be true and never waver, even in the pain of the loss and the grief that we experience in life. And then during the depression stage, right, when you're just at the very low and you're just so broken about this new reality of having this person gone from your life, you know, this is where you want to reach out. You want to seek help. If you feel like you've gone really low, you want to seek help. You want to ask someone to help you to get out of this, or to find professional help to be able to process through the hurt and the pain. And then with acceptance, you know, learning to cope with the new reality. You know, the thing is that when we lose somebody, it completely changes the dynamic of our life. It changes what we're used to. I mean, how many of you have lost somebody and you found yourself going to pick up the phone to call them because you got good news and you wanted to share it? Or you didn't know what to do and you're like, oh, let me call so-and-so. And then you realize they're not there anymore, right? It changes the dynamic of your life. And especially if it's a loss of maybe a spouse, someone that you've lived with for years and shared life with for years, and you go and you lay in bed and they're no longer there next to you. You know, or even more devastating, the loss of a child. You know, that's just completely devastating, because that's just not the way it's supposed to be, right? You aren't supposed to lose your child. You're supposed to only lose your parents. That's the order in which we expect it to happen. So learning to accept this new norm, this new reality, to be able to reorganize the way in which we see life with this person gone and out of it, how we are going to maybe find comfort and our needs being met in something else or someone else, to how to reorganize and redefine what the new norm is. So to cope with grief and to cope with such a loss, whether it's the loss of a child, loss of a parent, loss of a spouse, loss of a friend, family member, sibling, loss of a pet, loss of a job, whether it's through death or just broken relationships or whatever it may be, the top 3 things that you can do to cope is, number 1, to just reach out, talk about it, let yourself feel, let yourself identify those feelings, sit with it and process through. And you do that by talking with a friend, talking with a pastor, talking with a counselor. To journal your feelings, write it out, get it down, to pray, to seek God, to find comfort in your faith. and to just find ways to soothe yourself, to be able to listen to music or maybe read or maybe take walks or take hot baths or whatever it is that allows you to just be present and mindful in the moment, to let yourself experience the feelings you're feeling and to soothe yourself. We all, unfortunately, will go through loss, some more than others, and some hurt more deep than others. We all need to learn how to cope in a healthy way, to not look to unhealthy coping skills to try and deal with the pain, but to allow ourselves to admit to it, to acknowledge it, to identify it, and to be able to process through it. So I hope this was helpful. Grief is hard. Loss is incredibly hard, and it can really rock our world. And if we don't cope in a really healthy way and help ourselves process through the pain and the hurt, it can really sit with us and last for a really long time and affect us in negative ways. So I hope this was helpful. If you know of somebody or you yourself are grieving and are still really struggling with it, I encourage you to reach out. I can help you. I can give you some resources. I can guide you to maybe some professional help if that's what you're seeking. But please reach out, ask for help. Don't sit with this alone. You want somebody to be able to walk through this with you. So, all right, guys, I hope you have a good night, and I will see you next Thursday. Bye.